So what does RuneScape have to do with nihilism? Honestly, it's not something I had really connected until recently when I was reading some of the interesting comments left on my last video. My last video was about RuneScape being a bit of a time sink, not necessarily being a bad game or anything like that, just that the game is designed to require massive amounts of time and keep you hooked so that time flies by without really realizing how much of it you are giving or really what the consequences of giving it are. And well, the comments were interesting. Lots of people talked about how they broke or are working on breaking their video game addiction. However, there were a lot of comments. Often 3 or 4 comments just from one person going on about how life doesn't really matter, so how you spend your time isn't important. It's just as long as you have fun. And there usually isn't anything wrong with enjoying yourself. However, when having fun steps in the way of either being a good person or is having a negative effect on you or the people around you, this can be pretty dangerous. So why do so many people in RuneScape's community seem to have an extremely nihilistic take on life? I've really noticed these comments relating to RuneScape more than any other game for sure. Well, according to the Oxford Dictionary, which is always the easiest to grab from because that's what Google decides to recommend first, nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is meaningless. There's definitely a lot of nuance to nihilism that could be dug into, but for the purposes of this discussion, I really think the definition works. So in the previous video I mentioned, I talked about RuneScape's game loop and how through leveling and gold farming, players tend to get a false sense of achievement that doesn't translate to a real-life achievement. So in that sense, that idea of nihilism is correct, and also a mostly trained response. Imagine spending thousands of hours doing something in a virtual world that's pretty meaningless and doesn't actually have an effect on your life or the people around you. Now, a few hours here and there wouldn't have much of a negative effect, but thousands of hours definitely could have been spent better. The only cope would then be, it doesn't matter because we'll all die anyway, or all that matters is that you're having fun. There's really no other argument that could stand against such a loss of the most valuable thing we've been given, our time. So those are the 2 arguments that I plan to tackle here. Does it matter as long as you'll have fun? And really, does anything matter if we're just gonna die one day? The thing both of these arguments have in common is selfishness. Selfishness being both a lack of consideration for others and being concerned with one's own personal pleasure. You can imagine where this is headed, regardless if you believe in anything after death, and maybe you're right, and nothing does really matter. Even so, to other people things do matter, and time spent prioritizing fun is often time neglecting people that your time could have made a difference to. A tragic example of this would be being a parent, and rather than spending those 4 or 6 hours you get each day with your children, spending them playing RuneScape. Alright, but why does all of this seem more common in the RuneScape community? Of course, all games when played in excess tend to have such an effect, but RuneScape really encourages the success. You aren't going to pick up RuneScape and achieve everything in 1 week. Really, you aren't going to pick up the game and do remotely close to everything in 1,000 hours. 1,000 hours being just under 3 hours every single day for a year. The actions tend to give a sense of nihilism as well. Let's take a skill like mining or fishing for example. You click a fishing spot, or you click a rock, wait some amount of time, repeat this task often for hours and hours. If you do this long enough, perhaps you get to click more often, or if you're really lucky, because you were lower level, you get a chance to click something else. And at a job, you get up every day and you work. If you work hard enough, you get a promotion for more pay. We'll compare more pay to a better rock here. With better pay becomes more responsibility and the cycle continues. Who wouldn't be nihilistic after clicking the rock every day, or working that job every day, and that being everything to life? Of course, when things are presented so simply, we often lose sight of the bigger picture. So if there's only 4 or 6 hours each day after work, and those are spent clicking rock, clicking agility spot, clicking creature, the excitement is gone, and the sense of needing achievement is even stronger. Maybe if I click 14 more hours, it'll all be worth it so that I can do something even more exciting. It's definitely a game that puts the pointless actions we do every day into perspective, while taking away time from the valuable actions we do that makes it all worth it. So it doesn't matter because we'll die anyway, and all that matters is that you're having fun. really start to make sense when you view it from that lens. It's important to realize that when you break down those common comments, they are also a very unintentionally selfish mindset to have, but one that I held at one point in my life as well. In my case, it came from a lack of fulfillment in my life and just living on a constant dopamine stream. I think this is one of those extremely important opinions that really separates people, because anyone who prioritizes comfort and enjoyment over long-term fulfillment is not going to be someone that you can rely on when needed, as being there for people and being a truly good person can require confrontation and generally just being uncomfortable, as everyone would be a good person if it were easy, of course, but that's usually not the case. The state of uncomfortability is where people do most of their growth and improvement as a person. So someone who is trained with an almost Pavlovian response through games is going to have a much harder time choosing to be uncomfortable when the situation requires it. Because as you can imagine it, if you are spending tons of time doing meaningless tasks that give a high dopamine reward, meaningful tasks giving a low dopamine reward as a result are going to feel meaningless. I mean, why would you want to do something that is both harder and less enjoyable? Dopamine is our brain's way of telling us what's important. RuneScape, or any game of course, is never important, although it's usually quite enjoyable. So any major amount of time spent in these games is obviously going to have a negative effect on someone's priorities. This doesn't mean that games are always bad, although people seem to take someone saying that games aren't important or can have negative effects as being such a terrible thing to say. But it just means that everything else in life should always be coming first. This is then even further compounded with another problem. When taking a nihilistic approach, it becomes somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Someone who doesn't think their actions matter also isn't very likely to make actions that matter. This then further reinforces itself. So there's really a lot going against people playing games with addicting designs, or really someone playing a game more than a few hours a week where it gets in the way of their life. To put this into perspective, if someone works 8 hours a day, usually 9 hours after you include driving or just getting ready for work, then they sleep 8 hours. Again, usually 9 hours for a lot of people when you count how long it takes to fall asleep, or, people generally lay in bed a little bit. You're left with just 6 hours. The average person also spends around 3 hours on their phone each day. We'll assume 2 hours in this case because they're probably playing games instead, which I would argue is much better than just sitting on your phone. Now, on a weekday, this would leave just 4 hours for everything else. Obviously, you're going to get those work hours back on the weekend if you don't work weekends. So it's going to be close to impossible for someone to do daily things that matter in a 4-hour span, while also trying to throw video games into the mix. This would definitely give any sane person a nihilistic mindset. Work, sleep, phone, RuneScape. Work, sleep, phone, RuneScape. That doesn't sound like a very pleasant experience. If my life was that way, I definitely wouldn't be very happy about it. So I think it's important to bring these things to light, because the average person leaving comments like this probably hasn't broken down their life in that way. If you made a graph of how your time was spent, most of us would probably make some major changes. This is made even worse when you realize that most games are specifically designed to inch as much time and money out of you as possible. Most games' success gets defined by how many and how long they can keep people playing. In this case, MMOs usually do this through either microtransactions or monthly fees, many times both. Both of these, of course, have numbers that improve the longer someone plays. Now, RuneScape, as well as most games, also has a very low barrier to entry versus something physical, let's say like bowling. Bowling is generally something someone might do for an hour and then go home, maybe 2 hours if they really like bowling. It's fairly expensive to bowl too, so you're probably not going to bowl all day, and it's also tiring, so it's more likely that you're going to spend all day on a computer than going bowling, and the value of that day can obviously never be given back. Now, this isn't to say that bowling is more beneficial than gaming, although generally speaking, in-person interactions promote much more healthy relationships than online interactions. This has been shown in a couple different studies that the mood enhancement from online relationships is much less than that of in-person interaction. But the goal of this video isn't just to bash games and specifically RuneScape, but to show how a whole mindset can form over one thing you're giving your time to daily, and how that can really influence how you view the world. Of course, if you're doing actions that are basically meaningless, you're going to feel like life is meaningless. And this isn't a call for becoming rich and famous or anything like that. I'd argue video games are much better than doing those things. But being a good person and improving yourself daily, as well as building strong connections with people by being someone they can look up to and count on, can never compare with playing games or anything else for that matter. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, hopefully, leave a like, leave a comment, that sort of thing, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.